Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Denaja Pendergrass-Thomas, and I currently serve as the Director of the Placement Exchange. I am excited to have you all with us today for our professional development session for 2024. What's your strategy employer edition? This extended learning session is going to cover a host of material that we hope will be beneficial in helping you as employers, whether you are a hiring manager, member of a search committee, or someone who just has an interest in recruiting and retaining talent. We hope that today's session contains some information that will be beneficial for you. So without further ado, I am going to share my screen and we are going to dive in so that we can make the best use of our time together. Bear with me. Now I can see everyone. All right. So again, today's session is What's Your Strategy Employer Edition? Just very briefly to tell you about TPE for those of you who have not spent time with us in a while, we are on the cusp of a rebrand. And this time when I say cusp, I mean our new website and rebrand will launch 1 week from today. So we have spent a year in strategic planning and working with the marketing firm to think about what it means for TPE to be a year-round career service to the profession. The fact that you are joining me today lets me know that you have an understanding of the changing landscape of our workforce and that it takes doing more than just a once a year event for engagement for us to retain, recruit, and advance our talent. And so as a part of that portfolio, we are continuing to roll out learning opportunities, professional development opportunities for both job seekers and employers to help sustain our workforce and student affairs. So what does that look like? It's our vision, a sustainable, diverse, fulfilled, healthy, and vibrant workforce. I don't know that I've had a more aspirational vision, but also one that I believe in wholeheartedly. The success of our field is to have a workforce that is diverse. If it is not diverse in experience and identity, knowledge, and an ability, we will not have what we need to meet the demands of today's students, but also to support and cultivate one another. We often talk about what it means to serve the students, but as we talk about student affairs being a viable profession for practitioners, that means we've got to talk about belonging, community development, skill building, and competence. And so to do that well, we want a diverse workforce, and we want that diverse workforce to be fulfilled. We want folks to be in roles that are in alignment with their values and their career goals. We want people to be on campuses and in workplace environments that cultivate and nurture that zeal for knowledge and development, and then healthy. You know, we talk about well-being. I say harmony because it's hard to hold a lot of things in balance, but we want this to be a career where folk can see that they can do this work, love what they do, and experience personal and professional well-being, and then vibrance. That is the whole gamut of being able to be curious, to explore, to be critical thinkers, to be innovative, and to move our profession forward. So how do we do that? Through listening. I'm going to present today, but I'm going to do a lot of listening. I'll ask you some questions, but creating space to listen carefully to what it is applicants and employers are in need of, and then crafting guidance around what you all tell us, and then creating the content that supports that. And we will always provide the meeting place and the events for employers and candidates to get together. So that is a little bit about where we are headed with the rebrand and how we intend to do it. The tagline that you will hear from us a lot is empowered employers and exceptional candidates. We are listening and creating content and crafting guidance and hope that the candidates who work with us and go through TPE will feel confident and competent when they go through that interview and recruitment process, so that when you as employers walk away, you go, that's the kind of candidates we are looking for. Likewise, when we say empowered employers, we mean from a search committee member to a person on a team, all the way up to a VPSA, wherever your locus of control is, that you feel like you have what you need and you're empowered to make decisions that help us to be competitive and on the innovative and leading edge with our practices and our policies for recruiting, retaining, and advancing staff. So that's where you will hear it. We believe our candidates or applicants will be exceptional and that our employers will continue to be empowered to move our field forward. I always give a shout out to my 2024 planning committee. I am a team of one. And so if I did not have these amazing individuals, I'd be in pretty bad shape. But apart from the planning and the logistics, I think they are what makes TPE unique. I don't make decisions in isolation. I don't even make them just in conversation with NASPA or Kuhoi. I meet weekly with these practitioners who are in various focus areas within student affairs and all across the country. And so when we talk about needs, when we talk about interests, when we talk about programming, they are my thought partners. We challenge, we encourage, we create, and I hope that what we continue to do together communicates to you that we are trying to keep our ear and our eyes open to what the needs are in our field and produce things that are relevant and timely towards that. An extended learning session. What are we going to do? We're going to hit a lot of things. Some things at a high level and some things in more depth, but we're going to run the full gamut when we talk about successful recruiting and having a strategy for your year. Now, I know we're in the middle of the academic year, but it is January, so we're saying start for the year. But I think what we'll offer are resources that you could pick up at any point in your process. But my hope is that they will guide you having an annual process that you come back to revisit and converse with your HR partners about as you create a talent acquisition process for where you are. So we'll talk very briefly about ethics because we want to be ethic and ethically minded, in what we do. We'll talk about recruiting and talent acquisition. We'll talk a little bit about those HR partnerships. I hope it's a partnership. We want to do more than just in that email to HR asking, is my job live yet? There's a bit more to that partnership that can be beneficial to you. We'll talk about the search committee, how you design it and how you manage it to set yourselves up for success. We'll talk a good bit about the screening and evaluation process. If you're in any public discourse places, you will know there's a lot of conversation from candidates about their experience, the recruiting, interviewing, and kind of that silent phase between acceptance and onboarding as well. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about an overall positive candidate experience, and then we'll wrap up by talking about how to navigate the virtual landscape. If you're working with me, you know I'm biased. We believe in the virtual landscape. We found it has been a successful way to increase accessibility to both employers and candidates who need to or have to do a nationwide search. So without further ado, let's jump in. A little bit about ethics and equality. When we talk about ethics, that is simply the standards that we hold for our profession and those who engage and participate in our profession. And so, again, if the goal is sustaining a diverse, fulfilled, healthy, and vibrant workforce, we believe at TPE that recruiting, retaining, and advancing talent that is absent of EISJ, which stands for Equity, Inclusion, and Socially Just Practices, as a core pillar of your operations is unethical. That's not to be inflammatory or judgmental. It just simply means that it's not really in accordance with the standards of our profession. Both ACUHOI and NASPA have standards around DEI, EISJ that TPE affirms. And so we want to say part of that means folding that into your process with intentionality. Now, I know some of us are in some states, they make explicit language or practice difficult. If that happens to be you, I am becoming very skilled into how we talk about welcoming experiences and sense of belonging. There is data from industrial organizational psych that affirms the importance of welcoming and belonging. That can be folded into your process if you are limited in the ways in which you can talk about EISJ. A sustainable, diverse, healthy, fulfilled workforce also requires that we be committed to grounding everything that we do in these practices. So often people are challenged because it's talked about as a tack on or as like something we do, as opposed to something that sustains and grounds what we do. I have found that if it is core to who you are and what you do, then there is less requirement for statements and for presentations. It is interwoven and carried out throughout the whole process. And so that is the goal that we are working towards. How can it ground everything that you do so that candidates experience it, not just hear you say it or tell it to them in conversation or in print? And then lastly, when we do this, you demonstrate that congruence and that authenticity, that what we say or what you say as an employer is truly what you value because it's been embodied in the candidate experience with you. So with recruiting and talent acquisition, by show of hands, you can use the hand raising feature, or I will also open the chat for you. I'm just curious to hear from you. How many of you have ever engaged in active recruiting? So not just posting the job through your HR process, but an actual going out and recruiting of talent. I see Julia's hand up. I'll give a few seconds, see some thumbs up in the chat. Perfect. I've got some language up there on the screen, but if you would like, I would love to have you share in the chat or feel free to unmute. What did your recruiting process look like, or what does your recruiting process look like?
I'm happy to go.
Sure.
Katie here. We will email grad school connections. So, you know, my program in the past, other people's programs, and ask that it could go out to students. And then, you know, get on Facebook pages. I'm in Indiana, so we'll do, you know, like residential life of Indiana, res life professionals, all of those different things. If you have a grad cohort Facebook page, and then personal connections, who in your like circle can you assist with even getting the word out so that they could maybe tell some other folks, give some of them the information on the school, what it's like to work here, etc. Because even if they are fully employed, maybe they know somebody, and they could help us recruit, etc.
Perfect. You have hit the nail on the head. It is the plan of action. It is having a multi-tiered prong or multi-tiered approach to making sure that you are getting the talent that you need. And so it starts with that clear definition of the candidates that you want to attract. Melissa, I heard you mention it linked the grad program. I'm going to go on a limb and say it might be that you are looking for positions that are very good for folk who are starting their career in the field or transitioning from grad programs into the role. And so having that clear definition around who are the candidates you're trying to attract, what it is that you're looking for in them, so that when that message goes out, right, if people are posting on their Facebook pages, we'll see, right, it's great for folks who are looking for small teams or this type of student demographic or this area in the country. And then your strategy also explains how you're going to recruit them. As you said, it names the 4 or 5 ways that you're going to do that, the network and the people that you're going to work with to bring your goals about. And that goal is to attract, to source them, and to select them. It is reactive, right? We usually don't start recruiting until we know that we have an open position and we go, okay, we've got a vacancy. How are we going to fill this particular vacancy? And so it tends to be linear with a specific endpoint, and it relies on some specific strategies, including ads, using ATS, and sourcing through social media. And it can be used for any industry. It's very heavily used in our field. I've been doing this work long enough to remember when infographics became the next step in recruiting. So in addition to the position description, you now have the infographics that talked about the benefits, the details about the campus and the community. And so we continue to expand on the ways in which we tell the story, the places we tell the story, so that we can reach the audience that we're looking for. Talent acquisition takes that and moves it forward just a little bit. It's thinking about this cycle of recruitment, retention, advancement, recruitment, retention, advancement. When we think that way, you're now thinking about more of a long-term strategy to find and to develop your candidates into pipelines for managing future staffing needs. It's a bit more strategic and proactive. It's continuous and ongoing, and it's got some long-term strategies that include branding and internal mobility, managing candidate relationships, leaning into some more data analytics, looking at segmentation, and learning management systems. So Melissa, I'll stick with you for a second as an example. So when these vacancies happen, you've got your pattern of reaching out to programs. Talent acquisition would almost say, you know, at the beginning of the year or to senior capstone courses, how do we present the story of our campus so that we now have a buzz with this particular college or university that we come every year to look for this type of student who's looking for this type of role. It becomes less situational and more ongoing in terms of developing that relationship so that you have a pipeline. It is an established brand. Someone goes, oh, absolutely. They come every year. And I remember Melissa talked about this, this, and this. I may not be interested in residence life, but I'm sure if I ask them, they might point me to someone else in the vision of campus life who could talk about other opportunities on their campus, or expansion to go, this year Melissa will come, but someone else from their campus will also join them to talk about the full scope of positions and opportunities that are available in their vision. So it takes that situational task and expands it to think about how do we cultivate a cycle of introducing our brand, meeting continuous talent, so that if and when positions open, we've already kind of primed the pump to come back and say, well, you know about us, we told you about us. Now, here are the opportunities that are available, and we would love for you to participate in our search process. There are benefits to both. And since everyone has said they're familiar with it, I won't spend a long time on these. But I always like to share them in case I need to convince anyone to consider a recruiting strategy. That increased representation and modeling. When you have an active strategy that is rooted in DEI or EISJ, you're hopefully cultivating diversity in your talent pool. If that talent turns into your workers, then you are in a steady way keeping representation and modeling on your team. And so the long-term impact is if someone's interviewing, I don't have to ask, can I speak to another Black woman who's on your campus or who can talk about experience? And you've got to find that one. There's a network that I can speak to, and you can do that across multiple identities or intersecting identities. It helps with morale. When you've got an active recruiting strategy or talent acquisition plan, right? You're keeping your pipeline going. You're thinking about ways to recruit this talent, but also cultivate it so that you can retain it. And if they happen to leave you, they stay in the field. And so with that, you get that increase and expanded innovation. You get creativity and perspective and insight and thought when your pool is constantly circulating with diverse talent. We know that when we have intentional strategies and a strong pipeline into our positions, we are able to have staff or hire folk that increase our decision-making capabilities and help us engage in effective problem solving. I put the asterisk by it because, again, favorable reputation is an outcome. If you do these things, word travels fast. When people love where they work, they will tell people about it. And so when we talk about having people be your brand ambassadors or your advocates, this starts with your recruitment process. And then broader market understanding. If we can spend time really dissecting into how we recruit our talent, where they come from, what drew them to us, how long we keep them, you start to get some data to go, okay, we pull a lot of people from the West Coast or from the Midwest or from the Southeast. How do we take this and say we either want to expand it or we really want to pour into this to continue to cultivate this particular niche or where we're getting our candidates? So you start to be able to look at trends and some data to tell a more in-depth story about where your talent is coming from, why they're saying yes, why you're able to keep them or not, and where you can grow and stretch when you're ready to expand or pivot in that way. So when it comes to an ethical and equitable foundation for this, TPE is simply asking that, right, when it's rooted in inclusivity and just practices, it's not only to support student success. It is to say that we do this so that the experience of the people that we hire is inclusive leadership and inclusive work environments, and that we're offering equitable pathways for maturing and advancing in the field of student affairs. It is expensive to get talent. Despite what people think, it costs more to go find someone new than it takes to develop and cultivate who you have. And so oftentimes we're always thinking about starting at entry level. Where do we go to grad school and pull in talent? I want to stretch us today to think about our mid-level, folk with transferable skills, people who may be switching from other disciplines. Some of what will draw that talent is to talk about what the experience will be like on campus under leadership and in work environment, and what those pathways are for staying in the field. And I just like to give data to show that I don't make this up. Our partners at Cup HR have that conversation on the HR side. There is a DEI maturity index that HR practitioners on your campus can avail themselves to. And so when we say that we have equitable practices, Cup HR is saying, right, it exists on your campus and your policies and practices already. And recruitment and retention of staff is simply an outpouring of that. And so when you tell your story, how can you talk about the ways that diversity is represented on your campus, equality is experienced, and inclusion is experienced on your campus? So that's just a little bit about nuancing talent acquisition and a recruiting strategy. I am happy to know that everyone is familiar with recruiting. I want to pause and ask any questions or thoughts about that piece. Again, very high level, but want to make sure that everyone has strategy front of mind for how we're going to talk today. Good deal. So the case for HR partnerships. I'm going to do another very quick poll. How many of you would say that you have a healthy strategic partnership with at least one person in HR on your campus? I got a slow raise. I got one and a maybe. Okay. I got a thumbs up. We'll take a thumbs up. Um, Oftentimes when I talk to folk about their experience with HR, there's a sigh or there's a desire that the relationship was a little stronger, or looked a little different. And oftentimes I go, well, what is it you're expecting HR to do? And so here's my question. I'll let you throw it in the chat. I do have some things up there, but prior to me sharing this slide, if I were to ask you what HR does on your campus, what are the top two things you would tell me HR is responsible for? I'll ask it differently. What are the top two things? There we go. What are the top two things you go to HR for? Hiring and accommodations. Absolutely. Processing hiring paperwork. Screening for the minimal qualifications. Getting the job posted. Completing the hiring process. Compensation. Hiring and accommodations. All right. That is mostly what we interact with HR around. It is helping with the job search process. Help me get these people in, get them onboarded, and get the process taken care of. In addition to working with you, they have to work with everyone else on every issue related to staffing. And so if you think about the size of your campus and the number of employees that you have, your HR team, which is usually not a large team, is responsible for managing the staffing process, compensation and benefits administration, training and development, employment law, and worker protection for your entire campus. And then we go, where's my requisition in queue? How long until my job goes live? Can you sign off on this? I just really need you to sign off on this. I had a candidate come back and ask me a question. I'm not sure about the answer. Can you tell me the answer to this question? What I propose is, because your time is valuable and their time is valuable, how do you cultivate a relationship with your HR liaison that gets you everything you need upfront before you run through the process and allows for you to have what looks like an annual check-in, to make sure that you're good to go for your upcoming processes. And so when I say who does what, where, when, and how, I say that because I polled my TPE committee and I had 5 different answers from the people that I asked. That on your campus, who is responsible for this? And they're like, well, we have one HR person for the whole division. Someone else says, I've got an HR person per office. So Housing Residence Life has an HR person, Counseling Center has an HR person. Someone else was like, we don't have a centralized recruiting process. Every office recruits on their own. Someone else said, we have a recruiting process as a division. At an institution where I used to work, HR was like, we have minimal requirements. Beyond that, you can do whatever you want. I was walking around thinking I was very limited on what I could do, because HR had not done it for me. And they just simply said, this is the minimum that we do for everyone else. Anything above that, you just need to run it by us. And as long as it is ethical and legal and fits with our mission and vision, we'll go for it. And I've also found in conversations with HR, student affairs or campus life function so differently from other departments or divisions on campus, that they are often like, why does your process have this? Walk me through your process. Help me understand why this is the way that you want to go, particularly around salary and benefits. Because we require the master's, or many of us have required the master's for what's considered an early career entry level position. And so having some of those questions caused me to really sit down with our HR partner and go, how can we have a strategic partnership that keeps me and you on the same page throughout the year? And so we sat down over the summer for a informational session, and she walked me through their strategy, their process, and the timeline that they keep for recruiting on their side of the house. And it let me share what I had in mind, which helped me learn I move a lot faster than HR on my campus is ever going to move. And so if I don't want to be frustrated, I need to factor in how long it actually takes them to run their process and align it with my process so that we can be on the same page. I also got her to give me a tour of Workday. I'd never worked in Workday before. And so I was able to see on the back end, this is what it looks like when the applicants come in. This is how you can filter and sort. This is where we ask your feedback from candidates. I learned we have all these forms for candidate feedback. When I went in Workday, they wanted to know, did at least 3 people meet with this candidate? And were they given a 1, 2, or a 3? I thought, that's all you want? I've got pages and pages of candidate assessment. And all you need to know is that this candidate met with 3 people and their ranking was either a 1, 2, or 3. I asked them for their guidance on writing a position description. I came from a school where we sourced out through a Hawaii how other schools wrote position descriptions. Put a whole lot of time, effort, and energy in one. And they're like, it's very creative. You're missing some key fundamental things that need to be in your position description. And so meeting with your HR rep and really learning who does what, when, where, and why, and making sure that their process maps onto your process can save you a lot of headache and heartache. I also found working through their role in the candidate assessment process helped me out significantly. As the search chair, kept great detailed notes, was highlighting candidates who were moving forward and who weren't, and was struggling to find time to go back in the ATS system to do these things. Our HR rep was like, if you just share your spreadsheet with me and tag me when you're done with this phase, I'll go in the ATS system, update candidates, and send them the automated message or personal message if that's what you would like to let them know where they now stand in the process after this particular round. So again, it's going and asking them some questions, learning a little bit about their process, um, and then putting that together to create a partnership for you and your HR rep or HR reps. So again, some of these questions are there. What resources can they provide you with? No one wants to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes you want to get very creative, but if there's a template that already exists, get that template. Particularly when it comes to your committee, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. Um, ask for those checklists, ask for things that you can share that are already packaged and put together by HR. It may not be everything you want, but it can get you a good baseline to start some of the creative work that you want to do. And then when you finish, go back and share what you've come up with. Share your timeline. Make sure that the clarification of roles is there. Share your drafted position description and get feedback. Make sure it's good to go. Talk with them about your search committee composition, the responsibilities and the training and the resources that you're going to use for them. Walk them through your full candidate assessment process. EEOC violations get us in a lot of trouble. Questions that we should not be asking or steps in the process that maybe need to be reversed or different in order can provide hiccups when we're in the midst of things. But we have already been able to walk through this on the front end, you can be up and running and ready to go as the academic year starts or as your recruiting season or recruiting cycle starts. One that I really want to talk about, talk with your HR in advance around your full benefits package. What is the university policy around transparency and negotiation? Oftentimes, we do all of this work. We talk to candidates, we bring them in. They ask questions around compensation, salary, and benefits. And we go, oh, I'll have to check with HR. Or I'm not the person to ask. You should ask HR. If you know that, there are ways that we can say that to candidates that present as very knowledgeable and prepared and turn into a warm handoff as opposed to a conversation that usually turns very awkward. And so be very clear about HR around what you can communicate about full compensation, salary and benefits, negotiation. Nothing is worse than offering to a candidate, they negotiate or they give you a counter offer and you go, I'll have to get back to you. Make sure if you've had conversation with HR and your supervisor, if applicable already, right, when that happens, you can continue that conversation with the candidate in a way that makes you prepared, doesn't stall on that process, and shows, right, we have been very intentional in preparing to move our candidates from start to finish with our process. And then lastly, about EISJ, talk with HR and request any materials on inclusive hiring practices and intersecting identities. If your campus doesn't have any, do your own research, pull together what you would like to use, and make sure you run it by HR for approval before you move forward. Request that positions be posted on sites and in networks that will reach the pool that you're looking for. I came from a school, they were going to say the same three places: LinkedIn, Indeed, The Chronicle, and Hire at Jobs. I had to know that there were other networks and communities that I wanted these positions posted. HR didn't have a problem, they just had a standard operating procedure. And so be clear about where they're going to post your positions, talk about where else you would like them to go, and make sure that when everything is posted and goes live, it's where you would like those positions to be. And then also ask HR to leverage their own professional networks and association postings to get your positions out there. They can do that. Those places do exist, and they can expand the reach depending on the candidates that you are looking for. Any questions or thoughts? Again, we went very quickly. You all seem to be a group who've had some relationship and partnership and understanding your relationship with HR, but I want to make sure I pause if people have thoughts, things that have helped you in working with your HR partnership. Um, and then if you feel so bold, questions or concerns that you have that we might be able to talk through as a brief case study.
I think in my experience that certainly with HR, a lot of the hiring things there is a lot of support for. It's really some of those other areas that you mentioned, like the training and development, that we're really not getting what we might expect. But a lot of that I think also has to do with, like you noted, staffing levels. I mean, I'm working in the housing department for a Big 10 institution, and we have our own housing HR entity, and now they're talking about taking them and making them potentially going to a shared service model with the rest of student affairs, which some of those departments have support and some don't. And I'm like, I don't know that that helps us. It honestly think helps us to have our own folks. And really with the hiring, it certainly does, because we can focus them on our types of positions. But I do a lot of the legwork that's very specific to where do we recruit from and where do we get our folks, because they're, doing everything from facilities to dining to, and I'm trying to get resident directors and conduct coordinators and things. So it's a very different focus. And so a lot of times they're generalists, and I'm kind of almost the HR specialist, even though I'm not an HR person.
You hit the nail on the head, which is why I put this section in here. Right. When people go, where are the candidates? They go to Naja, where are the candidates? HR says they have posted it. And I'm not seeing high numbers in the pool. And yes, there are some shifts in the folk who have interest in our work, but it is exactly what you said, Melissa. They are generalists. They are sourcing for an entire campus, or if they can be specialized, it's still for an entire division. It is still on the hiring manager sometimes, or their search committee chair, to really have the awareness of the niche groups, the marketplaces, and the networks to find the talent who will be interested in the particular job or the particular work that you're hiring for. And so that's why I recommend this conversation, so that if you don't know, you have an awareness of the limitations of what HR can do, and where you need to bridge that gap. And so when we get to search committee, we're going to talk about how to leverage your search committee, at least on the network and networking part, to help bridge that gap. We're going to also talk about some resources available, particularly for training and development of your search committee. There's a lot that goes into equipping folks to help you search. And oftentimes you may have to create or supplement some of those materials. But when we think about the strategic plan, if you can carve out time, just like you do staff training or other practices in the summer, you may not do it in the summer, but once a year to revisit the nuts and bolts of what you need for your recruiting strategy or your talent acquisition strategy, you can have those things updated, reviewed, and in place when you're ready to pull your committee together for that training and development. Because if you are the person responsible for it, in addition to the laundry list of other things you're doing, if we wait until we need it, it can feel like a burden or overwhelming to suddenly have to put it together in that moment when you're already focused on how to get someone into the position that you have a vacancy for. So thank you very much for sharing that. Anyone else, observations or thoughts around your strategic partnership with HR, questions around working with HR, or how to supplement what HR is not able to do or fulfill for you?
Hi. Hi. I think what my name is Julia Sheher Harris, and from the Northeast, and I do work with Kristen Dedrick. I think what is a little challenging for us is the fact that we are unionized, right? So we have some contractual agreements that needs to be taken into account, including, the salary administration program in terms of, how much one can make, et cetera, et cetera. But I think most importantly, in terms of, recruitment, what I have observed and find a little challenging working with HR is the fact that most of our colleagues cannot speak about the positions with authority, really a good understanding of what the position entail and be able to sell it. And so they rely heavily on us to do the work. So I like the idea of, the training piece and working with HR together to really kind of like say, these are the people that we are looking for. I mean, I can talk about social justice, but if my HR individual is not interested in that or is not their area of interest or expertise, then the whole conversation is just going to fall flat. But I like the fact that we can sit down and have a conversation about the importance of really recruiting a diverse workforce for our institution. And I think we do that, as a department, we do that. And we, attend conferences. We are, as a matter of fact, in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we are going to MEPC, right? And we're going to Southern, placement in Fort Worth in Texas. So we are doing all of that. However, if someone then calls HR and talk about, with follow-up questions, I don't think that anyone within that will be able to really kind of speak with authority about what it is that we're looking for one and what the position entail. I just wanted to share that piece.
Mm-hmm. No, I appreciate that. And you're naming why we're having this conversation, because the reality of it is, if you are chair of a search committee or a hiring manager in student affairs, because of all that we look for in the way that our processes work, it's a heavy lift. And so it often does require setting aside the time to really dive into all of these things and make sure they exist somewhere, either in print, or in the form of a training or an online module, when it comes to the search committee preparation, and in that reverse conversation with HR. And to what you said, that last piece to check in and review, right? Here's what we discussed, recognizing that knowing the ins and outs or details of this position, would it be helpful to provide this fact sheet for Q&A? Do you have to be the sole contact for follow-up questions? Can they be filtered to us, right? On behalf of the university, thank you for reaching out. The hiring manager will be best suited to answer these questions for you. So that they're prepared. It feels very professional and like a smooth handoff to an interested applicant. But fortunately and unfortunately, right, if it is a handoff to you, then you know what's being shared is what you want candidates to know. If that has to go to HR, what does helpful packaging look like for them to have in front of them? And the PR marketing usually says a one-pager. I would call it a fact sheet. Under these areas, the responsibilities, right, to help a candidate get it, questions about location or with us, whatever those kind of high level things are that you want to make sure candidates have a good impression about, I put it in a one-pager. That way it's an easy resource if they get a call or get that email. But you make a good point, and that's that's some of the challenge. And that's part of why this presentation was created. We get a lot of feedback from candidates about their experience and a lot of feedback from employers around the factors that are not within your control. Right? When they name the things that impact their experience, it's like, well, gosh, Anaja, I can't control that. The subversive part of me is always like, you can't, but how can we influence it? And so what can we come up with that can influence or supplement to help you in that way? Go ahead, Julia. I saw you unmute.
No, thank you.
So now we're going to start talking about attracting talent, which this conversation started to go in that direction anyway. And so for me, this is Danaja's opinion with TPE. You all can nuance it or question and say, oh, Danaja, I don't know. I believe that it starts with that position description because you want someone to go, this is the job that I want to do, and this is where I want to do it. And so the first thing is to help a candidate feel like this is a job that I want to do. Excuse me. And so when we think about your position description, again, I'm going to pick on a Kuhoi a little bit because I'm on the listserv. People are always like, we're hiring or creating this role. Does anyone have any sample position description? Which I don't think is a bad thing, as long as, right, you are sourcing from multiple campuses and you're taking into consideration what that position looks like on their campus and what that experience or position will look like on your campus. And so there's 6 things that I like to think about when we talk about the position description. And the first one is clearly communicated responsibilities. We are getting dinged on other duties as assigned. And I know that there is no way to safeguard from knowing that there are going to be some things you have to do in this role that we just did not put in this bullet point. But you want to get as close as possible to having a candidate accurately understand what's going to be asked of them if they say yes to this role. And so you really want to sit down, if that looks like a time study with folk who are in the role, if that looks like pulling data from an exit interview from someone who is departing from the role, or a mixture of both. If it's observation or just feedback from annual evaluations and assessments, be clear about what the primary responsibilities of the job are. And I would say what the expectation of time and commitment are for them. People take positions because they go, I love working with students and I want to be student facing. And I go, this position impacts students, but you will have a little amount of time with students. But if they see the bullet point that says that and they latch onto what they're looking for, they may overlook the other things that are there. And as the manager goes, it was on the position description. I told you this is what you would do. But oftentimes we pick up on the things that we really love. And then we go, these are the things I will do. I will tolerate, I will manage. But this is the thing that I love. So you really want your position description to give an accurate understanding as best you can of the responsibilities and the duties that someone can expect in this role. You really want to have well thought out skills and abilities listed there for how a candidate will carry out the work. And so oftentimes we just say minimum qualifications, maximum qualifications, education, and we're done. We should really consider talking about the skills and abilities because those are the things that impact not whether or not the work got done, but the ways in which it got done. And 9 times out of 10, once you're in a job, the challenge wasn't if you did it, it's how the work got done. And so when we talk about skills and abilities, is it communication? Is it the ability to negotiate? Is it to talk about the brand of the team? Is it to manage parent and family relationships? Really work through the skills and abilities that someone needs to perform those responsibilities and is an essential duties. And likewise, then follow that up with, if these are the skills that someone needs, what qualifications align with the skills that are needed? And so this is how I've helped employers think through the conversation around educational requirement. If you can show me competence with this skill set, and you can do that with a bachelor's degree or an associate's degree, am I then going to require the master's or the doctoral degree? And so it is talking holistically about the role and ensuring that everything you list or require of a candidate supports the other areas of the position description. And then that last piece, when you talk about exemption status, some things are determined by your state, but it never hurts in terms of transparency for a candidate to understand what the exemption status is and why. Some campuses, if you're in housing and residence life, you are considered an essential personnel. You may want to talk about what that means and how that impacts exemption status. If there's comp time or overtime or whatever that process looks like, it is worthwhile to share that in the position description in the same way, Julia, in talking about being unionized. Any pertinent or necessary union information should be included on there. And then lastly, as we talked about, salary and benefits transparency. If you cannot disclose salary, get the language from HR that you can share and make sure, right, if a candidate has a question, who is the person that they are to follow up with, and add that to the instructions about the position description. Welcoming and inclusive. Again, if you are not able to use particular language around DE&I, that is okay. And welcoming and inclusive experience is also important to talk about. And so you want to examine the language that you use and shy away from jargon. I did not come through student affairs in a traditional way. And when I first started, I was jaw dropped at the number of acronyms that are used in our field. And it can be very intimidating and make you feel less confident to constantly have to go, I'm sorry, what is that? Can you remind me what that is? And so when you are writing a position description, you want it to be understood by the largest group of potential applicants as possible with confidence and competence. And so shy away from gendered language. If you've got some jargon on your second scan, go back and go, how can we make this more broad or more general in understanding? Same with idioms. The goal is for it to be easily understood, to help a candidate begin to see if they can see themselves in this role on your campus. You want to discuss resources. It's okay in that position description to also talk about any resource groups, affinity groups, and any other university-wide initiatives that help candidates understand how you support your employees. Tech and banking are very good at this right now. Their position descriptions are masterful at marketing. It is like, have you considered working with telecom? The telecom experience looks like this. Make a difference. And so when you read the roles and responsibilities, you are able to read it as someone who will be impacting the climate and the culture of that company. And so don't just put responsibilities, bullet, 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 bullet. Play a vital part in shaping the mission and vision of our division. What is that division? So then mission, excuse me, then list those responsibilities. And someone goes, oh, okay, it is a welcoming experience. It's a holistic student experience. It's retention. Oh, this role has a direct impact on these things. And this is how it looks. And this is what I need to do it. And this is how I'll be compensated. That works for me. Or I don't know about the compensation, but this sounds really appealing. I'm going to apply anyway and continue the conversation to learn more. So, it's not just the responsibilities. It is the KSAs. It is the required experience, but then it's also the inclusive language and practices and how you write it. It's the resources that I know that will be available to me to be successful in the role. And it's the accommodations that have already been thought about so that I don't have to ask, can this be adjusted or is this possible? I'm able to get a full picture as best I can from the position description based on what you all have provided as employers. The other reason why I really harp on the job description or the position description is because that is the beginning of the relationship. It is the framework for your interview process, and it is the framework for how you will assess your candidates when they become your employees. And so when people get into a role, if it suddenly looks totally different from what they applied for, they will tell you, this is not what I signed up for. And so we don't want those sorts of conversations. We want it to be a supportive conversation that they are able to feel confident because what they understood to be their responsibilities is their responsibility. And so they are very quickly able to be efficient and effective. That increases motivation. And ultimately that increases productivity from someone who goes from being applicant to candidate to employee. And then again, shaping support for proper performance evaluation, your feedback processes, and your plans for professional development. When someone says, right, I've got this idea for professional development, and you say, tell me why, how's it going to support the role that you signed up for? Where does this align with role responsibilities, with improving your skills, your knowledge, and your awareness? That can be and should be your point of reference for these conversations. And then lastly, I think it goes without saying, right? Position descriptions impact legal issues that may come up for both the employer and the employee. And so an accurate position description is paramount to have on record for that reason. I always encourage employers to, again, in that meeting with your HR partner, we used to review our positions every year. I would have my staff do time study and feedback, because we used to say percentage of time, so that when we hired again, it got closer and closer to an accurate employee experience. So if you can, embed in your annual planning to review your position descriptions, make sure they're accurate. We work with people, and I always say, if you work with people, the only thing that can be guaranteed is change. And so make sure that your position descriptions are keeping up with the employee experience and the expectation that you have for them. Once you work through the position description, we shift to the value proposition, which is why you, right? You've heard me say, can I see myself doing this job at this campus or at this location? This is where the next piece comes in. What makes your campus a great place to work? What makes your team a great team to join? What is this role's contribution to the larger mission and vision of your campus? What makes your geographic location a great place to live in? How am I going to grow? Have you thought about me in terms of what's gonna be in place for me to continue to become a skilled practitioner, a competent manager, and a leader? And how am I going to achieve my professional development goals? I can tell you that if you sit down to talk to a candidate and you let them know that you have already thought about their future, I could see myself doing this work here with you thinking about me. And then again, how does your compensation and benefits package support their holistic well-being? Again, oftentimes we talk about salary, right? But what is the full scope of benefits? Is it hours? Is it hybrid working? Is it access to the gym or well-being center? Is it counseling? Is it great insurance? Run the full gamut of everything someone working for you can expect as a part of their compensation and benefit. And then lastly, what systems are in place to encourage and nurture that inclusivity and belonging for workers? So here's another 30-second break. I want to get in the chat. Question 1 and 2, what makes your campus a great place to work? And what makes your team a great team to join? I'm only going to give you 30 seconds because I hope it's front of mind for you. But feel free to unmute if you want to share it with your excited voice. Feel free to throw it in the chat if you want to share that way. I smile, Kristen, but I'm with you 100%. I have worked with some great people that made the experience. I used to tell people I would work with Dr. Stephanie Carter anywhere she goes. She is by far the best supervisor I've ever had, and I might sacrifice cold weather to work with Stephanie if the position was right. I see sense of community and feeling valued. Kayla, you're spot on. There are 8 indicators that contribute to workforce sustainability. Feeling valued and community belonging are 2 of those 8. Collaborative environment. And you would have to talk to some people about that. I tend to like collaboration. I met some people who had some collaboration trauma. And so being able to talk about what makes collaboration enjoyable and a benefit, I think would be wonderful, because I think it's hard to work in student affairs and not have to collaborate. So if you're on a campus that's doing collaboration well, you've already put a tick beside yourself for selling that to your candidates. The best, that's serious, Kristen, best work-life balance ever had? Now we're talking. Lean into the things that make you want to do the work that you do. I invite you to ask your team, have a team meeting or have a staff conversation around that, build that list, and then ask people why. I'm about to get ahead of myself, so I'll go ahead. Back it up, inventory your staff, particularly around their diversity and diversity of experience. Listen to their experiences. Survey colleagues across the division. Say, we're really trying to tell the story here. To the point about collaboration being important, it's been great to collaborate on this campus. Tell us how collaboration has been for you. You get those good quotes. People love, well, I love a testimonial. There's a bullet point that says it. And then when I know someone has said it themselves and they attach their name to it, there's a different level of validity. And so to say collaboration is great on this campus, Van said, da 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 da. And Kayla backed it up. Kayla feels like X, Y, and Z. You go, okay. The other thing is when people answer that for you, put an actor by their name because they may make a great search committee member for you. The other thing, reference your department, division, and university strategic plan. We are wanting someone to say, this is the field and the work for me, not just the job, but potentially this is the place, the field, and the work for me. And so being able to see yourself as a part of the larger mission and vision is how we really build large scale belonging. And so talk about that where you can. Visit your local arrangements office and your Chamber of Commerce to gather resources, particularly around what makes this a great place to live. Be able to tell that and provide resources or at least access to those resources so that people can do their own research. And then inventory the professional development that's offered. Yes, most people are looking for professional development funds, which allows them to go to conferences. But some of our campuses have great career services departments who are putting together great trainings. Assess your managers. If you can talk to someone about the type of mentorship or supervision they will experience, you can talk about your leadership and the collective decision-making, if that's how you function. Those are wonderful things to lean on, particularly when people are like, oh, we don't offer a high salary. I'm not really sure what to talk about. It's everything. It's everything else. Who you'll work with, why they're great, what you will experience, why it's great, what you will gain, and how we will ensure that that happens for you. All of that is your value proposition. And this is a place where you should not hold back. And when we talked about TPE switching from being in person to virtual, I got excited about this because I said it's not going to be in the swag that we can put in the mailbox or that we can offer to someone once they finish their interview, but it is going to be in the meat and the substance of who we are and what we do. So it's a challenge to dig deeper, to be more intentional. But in the virtual space, you are really telling a story that has the ability to draw a candidate to being a part of your team and fulfilling the mission and the vision of your campus. And so then the why. I really said all this, but I'll briefly touch it again. The goal is a sustainable workforce. That does happen one job, one hire at a time. But if we continue to do it with a high level of intentionality, with a clear and convincing brand, right? We are bringing in people who will hopefully want to do this work for the long haul, for the long term, and leverage their own network and resources to invite others to join them, to join us in doing this work. So the last part, cast your net and task your network. That value proposition becomes your brand. And that is what you want to leverage when you are engaging in your recruiting, when you are talking to those grad programs, when you are posting on social media, when you are standing up announcing in meetings, when they ask if anyone wants to talk about an open position. It's the brand. It is telling candidates why they should choose you over their competitors. It is saying it should be consistent. If you say it to someone, they should be able to see it on your website. They should be able to see it in the job post. They should be able to see it on your social media. And it can increase, or it should increase, the likelihood of you hiring aligned talent. That it's not just people saying, oh, I know that school by name. And they go, that's not anything I thought it would be like. It is to say, I want that campus because the meat and the substance of what the experience will be like for me as a candidate is what I'm looking for. And so your net is your strong brand. And then the thread for your net is intentionality. And so when I say speak to candidates that will see the value of your value proposition where they are, that is to say, don't just assume because you're a small school in the Midwest where it snows a lot and it's a small town, that people from the South are not going to be interested. Think about how you talk to someone who's not been in that area around the benefits of being in that area. Send announcements to colleges and schools, those listservs, career placement offices, recruit from your competitors. Of course, I believe in attending career fairs. And then this last one is one that we've really been studying with and thinking more about. Consult with And consider recruiting retirees or former employees. Not everyone who leaves a position was angry or frustrated. Sometimes life happens and we have to make adjustments. If you know there are people who left on good terms, who enjoyed the position, or who would be well suited for a new position or another opportunity in your division, keep that relationship. Keep them abreast of what's happening, opportunities that are popping up. You never know who may want to come back. And in terms of retirees, some roles, people go, I don't want to be in that particular role, but I did enjoy the work enough that I'd like to still be connected. So don't discount people who have been in the field and stepped away or stepped away from your campus for various reasons as potential applicants moving forward. And then who can and who will help you go fishing? Two things, your committee can and should do that. And then if you don't have a formal employee referral program, think about what it means to talk with your immediate team around getting behind a strategy. So you may not be able to give them any financial compensation or perk in that way, but the perk is, right, they are influencing or shaping or contributing to who may be joining the team. And so they can help you expand that local applicant pool, word of mouth conversation, and they can provide pre-screening for you. And then it helps to improve overall team dynamics as well. Now to the meat, your search committee. How many of you hire by search committee? Quick show of hands, either in the chat or on your screen. Yeah. It's probably going to be everyone, but I don't like to make assumptions. Yeah. I highly recommend this book. It is literally called Search Committees, a comprehensive guide to successful faculty, staff, and administrative searches. To Melissa's point around some of the heavy lifting that gets done, depending on what HR can do or is able to do, this book has been my holy text for navigating, recruiting, retaining, and a search process. Dr. Christopher Lee has been in the field for more than 20 years doing HR for college and university campuses. And he took the time to write what is basically a manual. And so I want to plug this. Some of the things that I will share come from conversations and from his work. But I truly recommend, just like you keep other resources on your shelf, considering that book because it is a wonderful how-to guide with some samples and some index resources or appendix resources in there for you. The purpose of your search committee, it's like a good salad. You want different ingredients in just the right mix to get a satisfying whole. If you're like me, there's nothing like having a good salad. Likewise, there's nothing like a solid search committee. Corey, your search committee makes recommendations after a process, but doesn't do the actual hiring. I'm not mad at it. Recommendations are good. I would love to hear more about that process. I think what I'll share about is probably more of the traditional structure. They participate in screening and interviewing. They do make recommendations, but they don't do the actual hiring. But that's good to know. I should ask that. In terms of search committee, thank you, Corey. What is the role or expectation of the search committee on your campus? Same as Corey. Okay. Perfect. Good deal. It's nice when the content is on par. A little bit about formation of your search committee. You may have internal guidelines for who needs to be on your search committee. What I am sharing is just a recommendation based on conversation, some trial and error. And so welcome your pushback for you to share some additional roles that you may add to your search committee. It should typically have a chairperson, and it can be a peer or person senior to the vacant position. On most campuses, it is not the hiring manager, and I recommend that it not be the hiring manager. They often or should have, if not a person on the committee, a liaison who is your HR, EEO, or diversity advocate member. It then has peers, supervisors, and folk who are consumers of the position. When I say consumers of the position, I mean, to Julia's point around working with HR, consumers of the position, meaning they can have a knowledgeable awareness and understanding of what that role does, the ins and outs of it, so that they can be a brand ambassador and be knowledgeable in answering questions for candidates throughout your process when that happens. You want diversity in all forms. That includes gender, race, age, status, and perspective. And I would also say ability. You want someone who is has the experience needed to decipher applicant materials and experience. Oftentimes, being a part of a search committee is seen as a professional development opportunity for folk. And if that is the case, then you want to make sure that they get the training and the onboarding so that they are experienced enough to review materials properly. And then, of course, right, you want it to be formed with people who have the time needed to devote to their committee duties. A little bit about the diversity advocate. If it cannot be an HR person, I would consider someone potentially from an office on your campus who does this work full-time, or if you have someone in your own office who does this role full-time. This person can and should support you as a chair or provide training on how to create an environment that allows for differences to be discussed. You don't want groupthink, right? Part of the diversity of composition is to get diversity of conversation. That means you've got to have a space where differences can be discussed openly and without folks shutting down. They can provide techniques for posing and discussing sensitive matters. That will come up. And so you want to have a process or techniques in place for when it does. They're going to provide information on reducing bias. You want some training on decision-making and behavior. You want someone who can support and monitor the activities of the committee, right? Who's listening to conversations, maybe not to contribute to a decision or recommendation, but who's listening to hear how the conversation is going. Are there preconceived notions that are popping up or biases that are being put forth and don't appear in step in the process? Who's your person listening for that? And how will they support, or how can they support conversation around it? They're going to help you ensure the decisions aren't made or recommendations aren't made solely based on gender, religion, creed, race, age, or ability, or any other protected class. They're also going to be the person who helps you ensure that you're following your institutional rules and regulations and any laws that are applicable. And then they're going to make sure we're exhausting every network we can to bring in diversity in our candidate pool. Once you talk about composition, there should be an orientation. We recommend that HR diversity person lead that orientation. Again, if you've got a system on your campus already in place, lean into that. Hopefully this can supplement or affirm what you've already got in place. But in that orientation, you're talking no more than 15 to 30 minutes. It is that introductory meeting, but the goal is to put things in place so that you limit confusion, you have everyone on the same page, and it ensures for efficiency for the rest of your process. Hopefully, I know some schools, depending on the state that you're in, there's a general training that you have to go through before you can even be considered to be a part of a search committee. If your campus doesn't have that, then again, we'll talk about some things that can happen in training that would supplement what your campus does or doesn't have. But in that orientation, you want to talk about your goals and the initiatives that you have planned. You want to cover your policies, any considerations. You want to go through the full process and any promising practices that you are wanting the committee to lean into using. You want to discuss responsibilities and any legal issues that people need to be aware of. Then you want to get into training. That's the actual how-to for screening and evaluating candidates. And so when you do training, it's there to safeguard you from any pitfall. You don't want to rehire the person who has left the role. You don't want to hire someone who is just like you. You want to use multiple screening methods. You want consistency in your tools, but you also want to have diversity in your tools, right? So that we don't, even in using a metric, get heavy weighted in one particular direction or one particular candidate without getting a holistic picture. You want to train people on how you're going to do your selection criteria, how they can eliminate or be aware of biases, your process for screening resumes and CVs, if that's not what HR does on your behalf. If your committee is going to participate in reference checks, please train them on how to do reference checks. There's nothing like saying yes for a reference check and you get on a call and someone's like, so just tell me what you think about this person. You go, okay. And the conversation is not prepared to actually use reference checking as a part of the screening or assessment process. And so if your committee is going to participate in reference checks, that those questions are ready for them, what they're listening for, how and if there should be any follow-up questions in reference checks, that all of that is taken care of. Your expectations and how to serve as an effective ambassador. Yes, they're in the weeds to help you with that process, but they are the people who are saying, I can talk about this job to any and everybody with excitement and enthusiasm, with confidence and with competence so that we can attract and draw talent to this position. And then you want to make sure you train them on how to document a search. Records retention is important. It's a requirement. So make sure you know the requirements for your state and your campus on retaining records and that your search committee knows how to properly document what they do. Then you want to charge them. That is saying, this is what we will do in terms of task, timeline, budget, and other important factors. That includes the clarification of duties and then your plan for accountability. I have said to folk on a search committee, we're not ready to meet candidates because materials have not been reviewed. As much as I want to move this timeline forward, it's even worse to move forward and have to go back because we weren't prepared as a search committee. And so whatever your expectations are at each point in the process, if your committee is not fully prepared to move forward, how will you hold them accountable to make sure that the process that candidates participate in is a professional one, is a thorough one, and one in which your committee is prepared for in doing so? So I've said a lot, and I want to give people an idea of what that actually looks like when we talk about length of time for a search process. And so, right, we're talking about meeting with HR to do that ask, learn, and share, doing the internal work of your brand audit, your recruiting strategy, getting your position description ready, drafting your committee composition, going back to HR and making sure you review your position, your requisition is out there, your strategy for advertising is out there, your committee has been approved, your chair has been trained. Then you move forward to orienting, training, and charging your committee. And then by step 5, right, your job is live, it's posted, you're casting your net, you're doing your networking, and you are knee deep in your recruiting strategy execution. Depending on your relationship with HR and how prepared your materials are, going through these steps can really take you anywhere from 30 to 45 days. And that is assuming, right, you're working with people scheduling and making sure that they can meet for the committee in addition to their full-time responsibilities. Now, if you have done this more regularly and you have some of your materials in place, you can expedite this. But I like to give people who are thinking of their strategy for the first time a realistic expectation for what it can take to get all of these things in place from start to finish. Just out of curiosity, when you look at these 5 steps, your partnership with HR, getting your position posted and your requisition out, getting your committee convened, and finally getting to the place where you are ready to start looking at applicant materials, on average, how long does it take you to get from start to that point of actively reviewing applicant materials? Just curious. $45 days. Yeah. Absolutely. I appreciate the transparency, and this is part of why we talk about how do we get close to a strategy or a cycle, because I know most of our campuses or departments are navigating more than one vacancy. And so if you're talking 45 days to get the nuts and bolts in place, every time you need to fill a vacancy, anything that you can have streamlined and ready to go makes those days a little less so that you can move your process forward a little quicker. But I ask this and I share that number because I also want people to be realistic around pacing yourself, and how you navigate functioning with a vacancy while you run this process. So I appreciate you sharing that, Melissa. Wanted to be fair with people, right? This is a process. It can work well, but it can take 30 to 45 days if you're expedient. Corey, he said it took months. Now that you use a process similar to HR, you find yourself able to do it. Yes, get them posted in 2 to 3 weeks. Beautiful. We want efficiency, but we want it to be because it's been strategic and that partnership has helped streamline that. Sometimes we can rush to get out of the gate, and then we've got some gaps that make us have to pull back once we've started, or readjust once the position is already posted. And so just want to think about how you can get yourself through your initial process and ready to go. So thank you all for sharing that. A bit about screening candidates. Here's what I tell job seekers, because we'll have their session next week. Their objectives are to get a job and to assess whether or not your organization is best suited for their professional goals. I tell them that your objective is to get a comprehensive picture of a candidate. You want to know who they are, what they have to offer, and why you should hire them. You are working to assess whether or not they will be an asset to your organization. And so when we move into strategies, screening is the process to determine if a candidate should come in for an interview. And I highlighted for an interview because oftentimes we put a lot of weight on the screening process. We look at the application and the resume and we go, oh, I don't think we should hire them. We're wanting to know, are they someone who should come in for an interview? And so screening is really to look at the must-have requirements, and then you're scanning for some good to have qualifications, which is good to know. But the goal is to start to build a picture for matching the holistic picture of the candidate that you're looking for. And so oftentimes that's reviewing resumes and cover letters, reviewing the application. And number 3 may be different for your campus, but this is one that I'm finding is promising in other industries. Reference checking happens on the front end of the process. Because again, it is to verify candidates' ability, candidates having those must-have requirements, and then scanning for good to have qualifications. So reference checking, depending on your campus or what you are looking for or what the law says you can ask, is really employment verification. Did they perform these responsibilities? If your campus allows you to be more subjective or open-ended with your reference checking, it can happen at a different phase in the process. But I am leaning into reference checking earlier in the process with more curiosity than suspicion, depending on the questions that you are asking references. So I'm just curious. Again, it's another informal poll, chat or show of hands. Does anyone have reference checking as part of their screening process? Not surprised. I'll keep you posted. We're continuing to look into it after the first round, but before the second. Okay. Later in the process. Gotcha. Yeah. A lot of places are not recommending it come all the way after the end of the process, that it should be somewhere in between a minimum first and second round interview, but definitely included as part of screening and candidate assessment, and not just say, we made up our mind, can this reference help sway me in one direction or the other? With this group, I think you all understand the purpose of interviewing. Once you're into interviewing, now you're doing that further matching of the holistic picture. Candidates should be showcasing and expanding on their skills, discussing their professional background, highlighting their values, and then leaning into their own career goals and how that aligns with the position that you're hiring for. Preparation produces validity and effectiveness. In our field, a lot of feedback has been around the purpose of the number of interviews that we have, who candidates interview with, and the types of questions that are asked. And so this checklist is simply to remind us to think about when we are coming up with our questions, all that we want to point back to are the critical success factors of the job. What are those requirements? What are those responsibilities? What are the skills and qualities that are needed? And how can we ask questions that help us assess that? And so from that, then you can think about the types of questions, the types of interviews you want to have, who should be present, and what sort of follow-up you would have from that. And then, sorry, Yes, and then the appropriate questions for any post-interview assessment that you would have from candidates by each interviewer. Oftentimes, we will have standard questions, and then if a candidate answers, a committee member may ask a follow-up question. And I've had to look across the table and go, "Do you remember your question?" And they'll say, I think so." And I go, "Good, because we now have to ask that to all of our candidates." And so when we talk about equitable processes and making sure that candidates get equal opportunity, if you know a question may open it up for a follow-up question, that you are prepared for that as best you can so that you continue to have an equitable process and experience across your candidates. Types of interviews, I think this group knows, right? We've got behavioral, situational, general, competency or case study, and then panel questions. If you're a person who is leading a search or chairing for your first time, we can definitely talk more about the purpose of these questions, and the examples of them. I think a mixture of all of these are important, right? When we talk about diversity of metric for assessing candidates, these different questions get at different things we want to know. So again, starting with the essential responsibilities and functions of the role, then map on what type of question would be the best way to get what we're looking for, and then think through sample questions that you can pull to do that work. A reminder that there are federal laws that we should pay attention to when we are doing our interviewing. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits discrimination on race, sex, color, national origin, and religion. The Age Discrimination Act of 1969 prohibits questions about a person's age. As someone who became a mid-level manager in my 30s in the Southern US, I didn't even realize I was asked questions that were not appropriate until I had finished the interview and was debriefing with a mentor. And I said, "Oh, it was just casual conversation." And they said, "That is not appropriate conversation." Someone just said, "You're pretty young. How do you feel confident being a manager at your age? What is your age?" And, without hesitation, I answered the question, but in hindsight, I recognize that's not a good question or an appropriate question to ask a candidate. And then the Americans with Disability Act and the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act of 2008. So these are all things to have front of mind, also conversations to have with your campus HR to keep you abreast of how to work with that. These are some major questions that oftentimes pop up again as part of casual conversation that I would love for you to just be reminded of should not happen. And I put simple questions in training with my search committee. And I give space for people to either say, "Oh, I knew that," or to ask, "Really? Why not?" And create that space to talk through them, to help people think about what is it you really want to know about a candidate? Are there better questions we can ask to get at building relationship or building rapport that don't cross the line in terms of legal qualifications? A little bit about skill assessment and job simulation exercises. We are typically not a field that does job simulation exercises. We have people do presentations, but we don't do a lot of testing. If you are a campus that does that, I just want to admonish you to be sure that you are addressing a specific job requirement. If a candidate is presenting, is the purpose for you to see how they present because a part of their role is training or presenting? Is it for you to see how they can engage and collaborate with your campus partners? Whatever the purpose is for that additional assessment or exercise, be sure that you're being transparent and sharing that as your why with candidates during the process so that they not only prepare, but they understand why they're preparing. Along with that, I would say make sure, right, the goal is to set someone up for success. If I am to believe that you will provide me with everything I need to be successful once you hire me, why would you not do that during the process? So if someone needs to prepare for a presentation or a form of public conversation or engagement, provide those materials in advance as best you can. I also think there is no harm in letting candidates know the questions that they will be answering. If it's researched and prepared, then you know they've still done the work to be researched and prepared. If there are questions that you need to ask to understand how a candidate will think on the spot, then clearly communicate. Questions for this round of interviews will not be provided in advance because we're wanting to see how you engage, how you think, how you process. What we will have in place in terms of accessibility is X, Y, and Z. So just think through the intentionality of the ways in which you assess candidates and add additional simulation exercises, presentations, or development of trainings and content. So again, in terms of assessing, there's some different ways, right, that you can be consistent in the metric that you use, but also be diverse. You can have candidates answer general responses to questions. And in that case, you may rate their response 1 to 5, but you've also weighted the question depending on what it's about. So for example, tell us why you're interested in this role and working here. They may only carry a weight of 2 on a scale of 1 to 3. So if someone answers that question well, you give them a 3. The question's weighted at a 2. Their total score or subtotal score for that question is a 6. 2 times 3 is 6. Yes. In terms of evaluation of knowledge, skills, and abilities, those are questions that may be given out of a possible points. So someone may accumulate 12 out of 20 points, depending on the requirements that you put for a response. Clear and thorough, includes examples, talks about why, and then how they would apply it to future learning. General observations, that may be what's used, again, for evaluation of knowledge, skills, and abilities. Did they answer this? Yes, no, somewhat. Were they prepared? Were they thorough in their response? And then to balance that out holistically after finishing the full conversation, would I consider moving them forward? Maybe move them forward, or do not consider moving them forward. And then for presentations and group feedback, you can usually ask agree or disagree, Likert scale questions. The candidate presented in a way that was clear and effective. I felt engaged. They were competent and confident as a presenter. Agree, disagree, slightly agree, disagree. You could rate excellent, very good, good or poor. And then likewise, would you consider moving forward, maybe, or do not consider moving forward? I appreciate the University of Waterloo. They have a full, well, that's never fun. Okay, there we go. They have a full kit put together for equitable. It's about faculty, but I believe in finding promising practices and helping them work for what we do. They've got a full toolkit, and I will jump down very quickly for you to see some of their tools. Use. I apologize. There it is. So, right, you can talk about knowledge and score, subject matter knowledge, skills and research. The prompts are there. You can rank points and then give comments. Likewise, in this place, it's under demonstrated, somewhat demonstrated, not demonstrated. So we will share this. We have permission to share this with you. So it's hyperlinked so that you can see their appendix for some different ways to assess candidates and put some of those templates together. So lastly, the timeline. We talked about assessing candidates and interviewing now. That screening process, round 1 interview, round 2 interview, final round, and then if there is a simulation or exercise, on average takes about 37 to 40 days. If you assume that screening, meaning the application is open and reviewed ongoing for 10 to 15 days, you take about 7 to 10 days to do your round 1, depending on if you use video interviewing or one-way interviewing. That can move it a little quicker as your candidate pool decreases, and you do your second round on average 3 to 5 days, and then your final round interview 5 to 7 days. Talking about a process that's almost 40 days to go from screening to finishing your final round process. This is my plug for leaning into technology as a benefit. The placement exchange does bring career fair and recruitment to help in this particular area. Our goal is that you can use the recruiter fair on the 27th to meet a large pool of talent, to also speak to people who may already applied on your site, invite them to the career fair to talk with you. Candidates can register for free. All of your screening conversation can happen in the app. You can download your metrics if you need to submit them to HR. That gives you from the 7th of February to the 3rd of March, which is 15 days to do your screening. And then the week of the 4th through the 8th gives you 5 dedicated days to do your first and second round interviews. So we really use the placement week to address right? That 7 to 10 days for round 1 and that 3 to 5 days for round 2 to give you a hub to get your concentrated candidate pool there for those interviews in that 5-day window so that you shift to your final round once you wrap up your engagement and placement, which means using TPE can help you adjust your timeline to really wrap up in about 27 days as opposed to 37 to 40 days. So want to make sure people understand for you to also see this is my plug for a screening 2-round and then your final round or on-campus experience with intentionality and using diverse questions, working with your search committee and your campus partners, you can really effectively assess candidates in 3 rounds. Work with your HR, talk to your VPSA or hiring manager to really see or advocate for what's necessary versus what's always been. We can take a very long time to recruit and onboard talent, and oftentimes the length of our processes cause us to lose talent, either to other industries or to other campuses. And so I encourage you to sit down with your timeline, talk to your stakeholders, tell them what your goals are, see if it's possible, have check-ins to make sure you can do this. But we really want to think through being efficient and intentional and thorough, but in ways that keep the talent that you have interest in so that you don't lose them in a timeline or process that takes a long time. And I hate to say very quickly because this part is important. So if you go, I understand it's recorded, you'll be able to watch it later, but I do want to talk about the candidate experience. I just finished an article with our TPE chair around the importance of the candidate experience. There's a lot of data that talks about how important the candidate experience is from start to finish and making sure you get someone from offer to onboarding. Many employers are losing candidates between offer and onboarding. And so our thesis is that the candidate experience is what can carry you over from offer to onboarding to ensure that the candidate you want meets you on campus when onboarding takes place. And so we're really talking about how the job seeker perceives their interactions with your organization from start to finish. It's how you demonstrate your commitment to treating job seekers with fairness and respect and professionalism. Again, I say the experience of a candidate should mirror, if not surpass, what they can expect once they become an employee. There is nothing lost in rolling out the red carpet for your candidate experience because it says, if this is how I was recruited, then I know what I can expect as an employee or as a member of this team. And so it also considers how diversity, equity, inclusion are demonstrated, whether or not it's just a factor that you consider or if it really is indispensable to who you are and what you do as an employer. And so Caress and I call it the vibranium rule, right? There's the golden rule. Some people call it the platinum rule. Caress is a huge Marvel fan, so she calls it the vibranium rule. And that is about having a framework that guides what you do in this process that doesn't just consider the other person, but it has the capacity to ebb and flow, to absorb and manage the complex identities and the needs of candidates in such a way that they experience belonging from the beginning, that they can see themselves as participants, we hope partners even, with your institution, beginning to craft a way forward that affirms your institutional goals and values and their own. So again, you've heard me talk a lot about painting a picture, helping them see themselves as a part of your team in this work. And likewise, right, their job is to interview with you such that you can see them as a part of your team doing this work. And so to do that, I invite and encourage you to prioritize making a good impression. Remember that candidates are assessing and evaluating you. And so make applying easy. When you look at the process, do you have questions that are intended to gatekeep and keep people out? Or are you set up in a way that as many people who are qualified can access the process to be considered? So lay out the entire process and timeline in advance. Provide questions in advance when you can. Let interviewees know who they will be interviewing with and why. Utilize technology and AI to support those efforts. Again, I'm a proponent of video interviews. If you can have access to a one-way interviewing system, oftentimes that has helped my committee screen by listening to responses to screening questions while looking at a cover letter and resume, right, to start to paint that holistic picture of a candidate. In the same way, candidates have been able to introduce themselves and engage from a safe or neutral space. You can do camera on or off if you're trying to keep candidate anonymity for bias-related reasons. Communicate often and close the loop with applicants. At every step, be sure, don't make the assumption, well, HR is going to answer them. You should have a process in place for how you will communicate with candidates at every step in your process. Even if they get a follow-up from HR, they should always hear from you. And then personalize those communications. If you can, don't mass email and BCC. It matters to say, hey, Kristen, we thank you for interviewing with us. We appreciated your feedback, your questions and engagement. While we're not able to consider you at this time, we hope that you would consider us again. Kristen's going to remember that they weren't left in the dark for 6 months or found out that someone got the position because they know who got the position. They're going to remember that you were intentional, that you were personal, and you were timely with your communication, that you valued their effort and their time, and that the door may not be closed. This just wasn't the right opportunity for them. And then bridge the gap between acceptance and onboarding. This is huge. If you've said yes to a candidate, and you know you've got background check and a few other things, have members of your staff reach out to welcome them, or as the hiring manager, consider what's one thing you can touch base on each week just to keep them engaged and interested and prepared, not to do work, but like to look forward to joining your team, so that over the course of the process, they feel like I belong somewhere. So that when another institution, or if another institution comes, you go, I have accepted an offer, and I'm committed to keeping this offer, but thank you for reaching out to me. Oftentimes, excuse me, in that radio silence, we're tempted to think about other opportunities or offers. And then the last one is to ask and provide feedback. The wonderful thing about an equitable and inclusive process means that if you have said no to a candidate, it's not about likability. You've got data and you've got metric information to say, we weren't able to choose you for this position this time, but we encourage you to think about, or to continue to improve X, Y, and Z skills, or X, Y, and Z experience, so that we can see you again in our candidate pool. And then likewise, my very last slide, ask for feedback. I have 5 questions that I always challenge employers to ask of everyone who's gone through their process. How is our communication? How was the overall timeline? How did we show up? Were we prepared? Were we interested? Were we knowledgeable about the questions you asked us? And were we welcoming? And then were we competitive in terms of role, compensation, benefits, and culture? And is there anything we can improve? There's no gain, there's no loss in knowing how you can grow and improve. And candidates should not feel afraid to say, I really enjoyed interviewing with you all. But at this time, right, the role wasn't competitive, or in terms of seeing myself doing this work, this is where it was a little gray. And so I think someone else may be better suited. But thank you for considering me for this role. In terms of improvement, anything that helps us improve is going to be for the better. So I know you may have to talk to HR about permission to do this, but oftentimes employers have shied away because they're concerned about the feedback that they might get. And I go, well, if you're concerned, that's probably an indicator that, that we may want to get some feedback, only because there's no one way to do this, and we're never going to be perfect at it, right? We're still working with relationships and with people, but any guidance that can help us be stronger, be more intentional, and better at what we do can only help. And then lastly, in general, assess your DEI efforts. And so this is some specific hard data around looking at the metrics, or the demographics of your candidates over the long term, to see if you are actually improving, or how you are ebbing and flowing between diversity in your candidate pool. You may not need to do it every year, but every 2 to 3 years, look at where your candidates are coming from, their demographics, and reassess your efforts if you have a goal of having a diverse candidate pool, which I know that you all do. And then lastly, the virtual landscape. TPE is here for you for your recruiting efforts. We do have the career fair on the 7th. If you've been working on that brand and you want to showcase it, we've got a place for you to do that. If you're ready to meet a large pool of candidates, we are doing our work to help that happen. And then in terms of hiring, if you want to lean into the opportunity, to hire through that 1-week process to work on your efficiency and your timeline, I would be happy to talk with you more about that at a later time. So friends, today, that is all that I had to share with you, which I think is a lot. And I appreciate you taking the time to be present with me. I know that we did a full 90 minutes and then some. I hope some of what was shared was helpful for you. If you have more questions, like I said, in just a moment, I will stop our recording. That way you can feel comfortable asking those, but I'm also available to meet with you at another time if that is more convenient for your schedule. But again, thank you for your time this afternoon. We appreciate you. And I definitely look forward to TPE continuing to serve you in the future.